are not dead? How could he still be alive? I don't know how many secrets he has hidden. His past is threatening our future. What exactly do you intend to do? The truth is often more brutal than we imagine. Is happiness just a dream? My ex-boyfriend was sentenced to death. The following winter, I ran into him at the supermarket. "You're not dead?" I gasped. He raised an eyebrow. "Wishing me dead, are you?" Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. When I saw Idris Farrier, I thought I had mistaken him for someone else. "What's wrong? Don't you recognize your own man?" he said. It really was him. I pursed my lips, not yet reacting, when Idris took my right hand in his. He led me forward a couple of steps, then put his other hand on the shelf and turned to ask me, "Smooth or ribbed? Strawberry or mint-flavored condoms?" His tone was so natural, as if we had never been apart. I pinched myself hard. It hurt, this wasn't a dream. Finally coming to my senses, I yanked my hand away forcefully. "What are you doing here? Where else should I be? Who was it that got hungry but didn't want to move, insisting I carry her on my back to go out?" He finished by tapping his waist. "You've worn me out. You'll be the one crying about it later." I was stunned once again. Idris was talking about 5 years ago. Back then, we had just gotten together and were in the honeymoon phase. Whenever he took advantage of me at night, I would deliberately make him carry me on his back when we went out the next day. But we hadn't had such sweet moments for many years now. Why had Idris suddenly appeared now, saying such strange things to me? I don't even know how I agreed to let Idris come back home with me. Perhaps it was because he connected everything so smoothly, his actions so matter-of-fact, that it made me confused about my own memories. It wasn't until we got home and I smelled the milky scent floating in the air that I suddenly came back to reality. By then, Idris had already come up behind me and wrapped his arms around my body. His hands even squeezed curiously, they seemed to have gotten bigger. Did the massages work? I slapped his hands away with a smack, my whole face turning bright red. Idris wasn't angry. He laughed and picked me up, intending to carry me to the bedroom. I was completely dazed. My only thought was that I absolutely couldn't let him enter the bedroom. "Idris!" I called out while struggling violently. "Put me down!" Idris finally realized something was wrong. He looked at me as I stood defensively in front of the bedroom door. "Are you hiding another man in there?" I felt a bit nervous. Idris's face darkened. "Move aside." I exhaled. "Idris, we've already broken up." "Say that again, I had known Idris for 8 years and understood his temperament too well. I knew that when he used this tone of voice, he was already on the verge of anger. I bit my lip hard and repeated, "We broke up a year ago. And according to the timeline, you should already be dead now." Idris finally realized something was seriously wrong. The old, run-down flat from before had long since been renovated. I no longer had the collagen of my youth either. Idris's voice was hoarse. "What year is it now?" 2025. Idris yanked me to his chest. "Are you lying to me?" I just stared at him. Slowly, Idris's expression also became increasingly strange. Finally, he said, "Impossible. No matter when, I would never break up with you." I lowered my gaze. "But I'm married now." When I finished speaking, the whole room fell silent. Idris's eyes were bloodshot. I could see the turbulent emotions surging within him. Using all his strength, he restrained his emotions and asked through gritted teeth, "Esther, did you count on me not having the heart to hit you? You're already dead." "Damn." Idris swore and turned to leave. It wasn't until Idris had disappeared from the room that I slowly crouched down by the bedroom door, curling up into a ball. My mind was in chaos. I never thought I would see Idris again. Even less did I expect it to happen in this way. At this moment, the bedroom door opened from the inside and the nanny poked her head out. "Esther, just now." I shook my head. The nanny didn't ask any more questions. She only said, "Luckily it didn't wake Annie." Looking at my daughter sleeping sweetly in her pram, my emotions gradually calmed down. Whether Idris was really dead or fake dead, whether he had time traveled or been reborn, I didn't dare risk letting him near Annie again. Nor did I want Annie to know that her father was a criminal. After that day, whether due to my reaction or not, he never appeared again. But I kept having dreams about Idris Ferrier one after another. There was the rebellious high school bully Idris who would follow me home. The desperate Idris who confessed his feelings for the first time, only to be rejected by me, red-eyed as he said, "You heartless girl." And the foolish Idris who, after I finally agreed to date him at graduation, ran to my house at 3 a.m. to confirm it was real. All those beautiful memories were shattered by a single gunshot. I woke from the nightmare, my pillow soaked with tears. On Monday I went to work in a daze. To my surprise, I encountered a groper during the morning rush hour. In my drowsy state, I felt someone touching my thigh. I turned around to see a middle-aged man leering at me. He seemed confident I wouldn't dare do anything. Just as I was about to unleash a torrent of abuse, a leg suddenly shot out from somewhere and kicked the man right in the side. "Where the hell do you think you're touching? Who do you think you can mess with?" Then I saw Idris. He had a cocky smirk on his face, but his eyes were cold and devoid of any humor. A vein was pulsing at his temple, the same expression he always had when dealing with troublemakers. It was a hard kick. The man was knocked to the ground. He took a while to get up, and though he initially tried to argue, seeing Idris's menacing face, he just muttered something and tried to leave. Idris was never one to let things go easily, especially when it involved me. Idris started following the man. I noticed some passengers had taken out their phones, likely to call the police. I quickly grabbed his arm. "Let it go." Idris raised an eyebrow. "Scared? I'm here, aren't I?" That's exactly why I was scared. If we ended up at the police station, how would I explain to them? Say, "Sorry officer, yes he's that death row inmate, he's been reborn to atone for his sins." We'd end up in the news. Death row inmate rises from the dead, beats up groper on bus in act of vigilante justice. But the current Idris didn't know the cause of his death yet. I didn't plan on telling him either. I just wanted to live my life in peace. And I hoped he could stay safe and sound. Just teach him a lesson and be done with it. Besides, my business is none of your concern. None of my concern? Fine, let your husband handle it then. Idris said, arm slightly bent as he gripped the handrail above. Didn't you say you got married? When are you going to introduce your husband to me? I wasn't sure if it was my imagination, but Idris seemed to be in a good mood. I deflected, "He's on a business trip, no time." "Perfect timing then, I'll keep being your man." He leaned towards me slightly, lowering his voice. After all, according to my timeline, we never broke up. I thought Idris was just talking big. Who could have guessed that the next day after work, as soon as I got home, I'd see Idris standing at the entrance wearing a security guard uniform. Seeing me, he sauntered over casually and said, "Temperature check." I didn't offer my hand. "What exactly are you trying to do?" "Working, of course. Working my arse." I remained silent. Idris raised an eyebrow. "Madam, please cooperate with my work." I gritted my teeth and reluctantly extended a hand. To my surprise, he actually just took out a thermometer and beeped it against my hand. 36 degrees, normal. "You may go." He was letting me off so easily? I took a couple steps forward. Something felt off. I couldn't help but look back. Idris's gaze was burning, brazenly fixed on me. Our eyes met, and his lips curled into an ever-widening smile, his whole being radiating undisguised joy. As if scalded, I fled in near panic. My heart was uneasy. I had the feeling that some secret was on the verge of being revealed. The notice board at the entrance of the estate had been updated. A new photo had been added to the security guard section, Idris Ferrier's picture. As I passed by that day, I instinctively glanced over. The young man had a strong jawline and a somewhat stiff expression. His brows were slightly furrowed, as if he disliked having his photo taken. After pausing for a moment, I suddenly noticed the name beneath Idris's photo. Hamish Ferrier. Thinking I had misread it, I walked over and looked carefully for a few seconds. It was indeed Hamish Ferrier. "Excuse me, is this name label correct?" I asked, pointing at Idris's photo as a community worker emerged from the guardhouse. She came over and looked. "Yes, that's right. Hamish Ferrier, our new lad." Suddenly I realized something was off. If Idris had truly time-traveled from 5 years ago, knowing nothing of what had happened in those 5 years, why would he have changed his name now? I was puzzled, but didn't dwell on it. That evening after I'd just finished showering, the power suddenly went out at home. Annie, who had been playing on the bed, started wailing in fright. The nanny had already left, leaving just the two of us at home. At my wit's end, I called the property management office. "Please wait a moment, I'll send a security guard over to check the circuits." Idris was on the day shift, so it shouldn't be him coming in the evening. When the doorbell rang, I confidently went to open it while holding Annie. "Hello," the power suddenly went out. I trailed off as Idris and I made eye contact. "Well, the three of us, to be precise." Idris said nothing. His gaze was fixed intently on Annie. His voice was extremely hoarse as he carefully pointed at Annie and asked, "What is this?" I was stunned too. "A child." After I spoke, Idris smiled. "Esther, I've only been bloody dead for a year." The room was shrouded in darkness. Strangely enough, Annie, who had been crying earlier, stopped as soon as she saw Idris. Tears hung at the corners of her eyes as she stared at him with her grape-like eyes. Her little hands reached out towards Idris, wanting to be held by him. Idris's aggressive demeanor softened slightly. He asked me in his hoarse voice, "Whose is it?" "I told you, I got married." "Married my a dash," he cut off the swear word halfway, glancing at Annie. He let out a breath. "I'll deal with you later." With that, he walked in with his toolbox. "Where's the main switch?" He was actually here to check the electrical circuit. Idris had always been capable, I'd known that before. Back in university, my family bought me a laptop which got water spilled on it when I lent it to my roommate. Replacing the motherboard would cost £200, which I didn't have. In the end, Idris came with a cigarette dangling from his mouth. Took apart all the components and said he'd fix it for me. I was skeptical. "Can you really do it?" Idris gave me a look. "If I can't, I'll buy you a new one." Amazingly, he actually managed to repair the laptop. After that incident, my roommates never again brought up the fact that my boyfriend was only from a polytechnic. My thoughts had wandered far. I didn't even hear Idris calling me several times. When I snapped back to reality, "What did you say?" I said, "Go stand over there. I'm dirty." It was then that I noticed Annie had taken advantage of my distraction to crawl her little hands onto Idris's face. She was patting it forcefully, making goo-goo sounds of laughter. "I'm sorry." I hurriedly stepped back a couple paces with the child in my arms. Idris said nothing, the torch still between his teeth as he turned back to continue what he was doing. Annie wasn't happy about this though. Away from Idris, her little mouth turned down and she started fussing. It was usually Annie's milk and bedtime now. The little one was tugging at my chest with one hand while rubbing her eyes with the other, getting cranky for sleep. I had no choice. I glanced at Idris again, but he was intently focused on his repairs, paying us no attention at all. So I went to sit on the sofa, lifted my top and started nursing Annie. Annie lay in my arms with her little feet sticking up, finally settling down. A few minutes later, the light suddenly came on without warning. The sockets connected. It was a tripped circuit. Just now Idris's words trailed off as he suddenly froze. He stared at me unblinkingly, as if he'd forgotten what he was saying. I hadn't expected him to finish so quickly either. My face instantly turned red. I didn't know what to say. I didn't dare make any big movements either. Idris's voice was a bit hoarse. "I'll go wash my hands." With that, he went straight into the bathroom. I looked down at Annie's contented face and sighed inwardly. One after another, they were both the bane of my existence. Annie fell asleep. The living room was left with just the two of us again. Idris instinctively reached for a cigarette from his pocket, but then seemed to think better of it and withdrew his hand. "I'm moving in tomorrow," he said. His matter-of-fact tone completely threw me off. "The child isn't yours," I said. "Don't you know about paternity tests?" Idris's words made me inexplicably nervous. I wanted to deny it, but I was afraid he might actually go through with a paternity test. My hesitation confirmed Idris's suspicion. His eyes lit up. "Esther, I may be 5 years younger than you now, but don't try to fool me." I didn't understand. Who was really fooling whom between us? Letting Idris move in was out of the question. I hadn't even figured out how to face Idris yet. With Annie in the picture, I couldn't take any risks. After much deliberation, I dialed that number. The next morning, I saw Idris waiting downstairs again. He wasn't wearing his security guard uniform, but still looked handsome with one hand in his pocket. A few female residents were gathered around him, chatting. When he saw me, he strode over. "I'll take you to work," he said. "No need," I pursed my lips. "My husband's back." As I finished speaking, a Mercedes pulled up beside me. The driver's door opened, and Fraser stepped out, walking to my side. He was impeccably dressed in a suit. Fraser walked past as if he hadn't seen Idris and asked me, "Have you been waiting long?" "No, I just came down," I replied. Before getting in the car, I took a deep breath and turned back. "Idris, I told you I'm married. From now on, please don't look for me anymore." I got in the car without waiting for Idris's reaction. Through the rearview mirror, I watched Idris's figure grow smaller and smaller until it disappeared. "Do you regret it?" Fraser handed me a tissue. I snapped back to reality, only then realizing I was crying. "No, thank you for helping," I said. I told myself I had made the right decision. The car stopped in front of my office building. Fraser called out to me, "Esther, let's really get married." I thought I had misheard. "What?" I said, "Let's get married. Even if it's just for Annie's sake." Fraser was my benefactor of sorts. He was my company's boss and one of the first to know about my pregnancy. Back then, after breaking up with Idris, I found out I was pregnant. My family pressured me to get an abortion, but I insisted on keeping Annie. They refused to help me in an attempt to make me give in. It was Fraser's support and care that got me through. Later, when rumors spread in the company, it was Fraser who spoke up and quelled all the gossip. He told me, "I need a nominal girlfriend to fend off arranged dates." I couldn't refuse him, given everything. So we started pretending to be a couple. But I never expected Fraser to suggest making it real. He said to me, "That man today must be the child's father. Since you don't plan to get back together with him and he keeps pestering you, why don't we actually get married? I'll take care of you and Annie from now on." I wasn't a naive teenager anymore. I knew better than to think I could conquer a CEO while having a child. "May I ask why?" I said. "After spending time together, I've grown quite fond of you, and I really like Annie too." Fraser paused. "Due to health reasons, I can't have children of my own." Honestly, I hadn't expected that at all. "I'm sorry," I apologized. Fraser smiled. "This isn't your fault. You don't need to apologize. I'm not forcing you, just think it over." I did give it serious thought. Fraser was a good catch in every way, and since he couldn't have children of his own, he would surely treat Annie as his own. Given the current situation, marrying him, this might be my best option. When I returned home after work, I saw Idris at the entrance of the complex. He probably finally believed what I said after seeing Fraser. But I didn't expect my phone to ring just as Annie fell asleep that night. It was an unknown number. When I answered, there was no voice on the other end, just the sound of light breathing. I sat up in bed, somehow knowing who it was. He didn't speak, and neither did I. After a long while, a voice finally came through. "Esther, have you really given up on me? Have you been drinking?" Idris didn't answer my question. "What am I going to do? I feel like I've lost my home." Those words struck my softest spot. Idris had never been close to his family. After his parents divorced, he became a neglected child, living on his own since high school. I knew better than anyone how much Idris longed for a home. After saying that, Idris fell silent. Then I heard the sound of someone inhaling sharply. My heart tightened again. Was he crying? I couldn't remember Idris ever crying before. Gripping the phone tightly, my throat felt dry. Where are you? Downstairs. Through the window, I saw Idris sitting on the curb. I knew I had softened. Because when Idris said, "I want to see you," I heard my own voice say, "Come up." Like a wolf given permission. As soon as the door opened a crack, Idris pounced. He held me tight and kissed me frantically. My rational mind told me to push him away, but Idris always knew how to set my rhythm. Gradually I lost the ability to think and could only act on my body's desires. The living room was a mess. He was in a good mood. Through the moonlight, I could even see the upturned corners of his eyebrows. It was fake between you and him, wasn't it? Looking like this, where were any traces of crying? I realized I had been fooled, feeling annoyed, embarrassed, and anxious. Do you have to bring this up now? Idris chuckled. I won't mention it. As I lost consciousness, I thought I heard Idris apologize to me. He said, "I'm sorry, my darling." When I woke up the next day, I was already sleeping in the bedroom. But Annie was nowhere to be seen. I was terrified and rushed out, only to see Idris and Annie playing happily on the playmat in the living room. Idris was holding some toy cars, flying them through the air. Annie looked up at them, reaching out to grab them, laughing with joy. The scene was so beautiful it stunned me for a moment. Idris saw me first and said to Annie, "Mummy's here." Annie grinned when she saw me and crawled over on all fours, wanting me to hold her. Seeing that I had picked up Annie, Idris stood up and walked to the kitchen. "What's the child's name?" "Annie Lockwood." Idris paused for a moment, then continued casually. "I'll make breakfast for you too." Reality proved that some boundaries shouldn't be crossed. For example, since I allowed Idris in yesterday, he had bounced back to life like an unkillable cockroach. At first, I found underwear that didn't belong here among the clothes hanging on the balcony. Then I discovered 2 pairs of men's socks in the cabinet. Today was even more outrageous. I even found 2 of Idris's jackets in my wardrobe. I threw the clothes at Idris in exasperation. "I don't recall allowing you to move in, do I?" Idris grinned, "Just leaving them here for now, in case I need them." "Not needed. Take them away." Originally Idris had been teaching Annie to walk. Arms outstretched, bottom sticking out as he followed behind Annie, like a mother hen. Hearing my words, he straightened up. "Miss Esther, how many times do I have to say it? We never broke up. If anyone wronged you these past 5 years, go take revenge on them. Don't take it out on an upstanding citizen like me." Him? An upstanding citizen? I could only scoff. While we were talking, Annie, who was practicing walking, tripped over her own feet and fell on her bottom. The little girl had been spoiled rotten by her dad lately and wouldn't stand for even the slightest grievance. Her little mouth turned down and she burst into tears with a wah. Idris scooped her up tenderly to comfort her. "Mummy's being mean, isn't she? Wanting to send Daddy away." He then glared at me. "In the future, don't say things that damage family unity in front of my daughter. Look how you've scared the child." "What? How is this my fault?" My attempts to drive him away during the day must have provoked Idris. He held it in until nighttime before he started misbehaving. He insisted on staying over. That shameless attitude of his came out again. "Esther, we've only been together twice. Is that normal for a man my age in his prime? My face isn't as thick as his. Do you have to say things like that?" "I don't say these things to other girls." Idris picked me up in one motion and placed me on the sofa. The moonlight poured over us like water. Idris didn't turn on the lights. As he leaned in, I suddenly noticed a round scar on the left side of Idris's chest. It looked like a gunshot wound. I've realized there's something wrong with Idris. For instance, his real name is Idris Ferrier, but he's now going by Hamish Ferrier. Another example is the round bullet scar on his body. Things have developed in the worst way I had predicted. To be honest, I'd rather believe Idris really came from 5 years ago. I could live with that illusion, it wouldn't be so bad. However, today at work, Fraser Wickham called me into his office. "Have you considered my proposal?" he asked. I suddenly remembered what Mr. Wickham had said to me a few weeks ago. "Mr. Wickham, I think." Before I could finish, Fraser nodded knowingly. "You're hesitating?" I was indeed hesitating. Fraser tapped his desk twice before speaking slowly. "Actually, there's something I've been quite curious about. I wonder if you could enlighten me. How does a dead man manage to come back to life?" When he finished saying this, I felt my whole body go cold, my mind blank. But I tried to keep my composure. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't be nervous, I'm just curious," Fraser smiled. "Actually, regarding the marriage, I think you should really reconsider carefully. After all, Annie is still young, and if anything were to happen, it would be hard for you two to cope alone." As I left the office, I mulled over Fraser's words. Was this a threat? If Fraser hadn't brought up these topics with me, I might not have been suspicious of him. But now, I couldn't help but be wary. Fraser doesn't lack money, and he's good-looking. Even if, as he says, his physical condition prevents him from having his own children, I'm sure he wouldn't be short of women. Why would he insist on marrying me, even stooping to threatening me? So his motivation for marrying me must not be as simple as he claims. That day, I went to the bank and withdrew all my savings. When Idris left before, he had left me a large sum of money. But at the time, I didn't know where it came from, so I hadn't touched a penny of it. That money, along with my earnings from work, would be enough for us to live in a small town. That evening when Idris came home, I asked him, "Idris, I'm thinking of quitting my job and taking Annie to live in the countryside. Will you come with us?" When I had this idea, I knew I was done for. But there was no turning back now. In the past, I didn't have a choice, but now I wanted to live for myself once, against all moral and ethical standards. Idris stared at me intently, as if he knew something. But he didn't ask me anything. He just said, "Esther, you don't have to give up anything for me." I looked at him, not understanding what he meant. This time, let's just live a good life together. Tears suddenly streamed down my face. So he remembered. He actually remembered everything. Idris may never know how important those words were to me. That night, I had a nightmare again. I dreamed of 2 years ago when Idris told me he had to leave for a while. I asked him where he was going, but he wouldn't say. The next news I heard about him was that he had been executed by firing squad. I couldn't even see his body. I woke up startled from the dream, only to find Idris wasn't in the room. I walked out barefoot. The living room was pitch black, with only a vague figure on the balcony. As I got closer, I heard him saying, "I've already given the goods to Barkley, don't worry. But Fraser Wickham seems to know something, keep a close eye on him lately." Then I don't know what the other person said, but Idris chuckled. "Don't worry about me, I'm doing much better than you." Not daring to listen anymore, I tried to leave but my foot didn't cooperate. Kicking the leg of the coffee table in the living room. The pain made me wince. Hearing the noise, Idris quickly hung up the phone and ran in from the balcony. "What's wrong?" "Don't come any closer," I said, holding out my hand to stop Idris. Idris froze. My voice was already choked with tears. "Still can't tell me the truth?" Idris pressed his lips together. I spoke again, "Then tell me, will you die again?" "No," Idris said. He came over and picked me up. "I'll stay with you. This time, I'll keep my word." The day I submitted my resignation, I went alone. I didn't tell Idris about my plan. To be honest, I was a bit worried. Idris was officially dead, and given what Fraser had said, he clearly knew about Idris's criminal record. Even I didn't know how a death row inmate could now be standing in front of me, alive and well. How could I possibly convince Fraser Wickham to believe my far-fetched story? The best way to live a peaceful life was to make a clean break with everything from the past. I had arranged a time with Fraser and went directly to his office. "Have you made your decision?" he asked. I nodded. Thank you for all your care and support, Mr. Wickham. Aren't you afraid I'll call the police? To be honest, a little, I admitted. I looked at him candidly, but I'm more afraid of losing him again if I do nothing. Fraser smiled. I accept your resignation. You may go now. I couldn't believe it was that easy. Thank you for everything, sir. I said earnestly, bowing deeply to Fraser Wickham before turning to leave. Just as I reached the lift, a sudden wave of dizziness came over me. Then I lost consciousness completely. When I opened my eyes, I found myself tied up in an unfamiliar room. I tried to move, but the ropes were tied tightly and I couldn't break free. The more you struggle, the more it hurts, I heard Fraser's voice. I couldn't believe the usually friendly Fraser would do something like this. He sat on a chair, swirling a glass of red wine in his hand. I didn't want it to come to this. I had no intention of hurting you, but since you wouldn't cooperate, I had to change my plans. My heart was racing. What do you want? I want to find Idris Ferrier, of course. I should thank you for asking me to help that day. Otherwise, I might never have known that your boyfriend was actually Idris Ferrier. Fraser Wickham smiled again. Isn't it fascinating? A death row inmate coming back to life. Since you claim not to know about this intriguing situation, I naturally have to bring the man himself out to ask, don't you think? I had no idea Fraser knew Idris. It had never even crossed my mind. How could Fraser Wickham, the universally respected businessman, be involved with people like this? True to his word, Fraser Wickham didn't harm me. As he said, he was keeping me here solely to lure Idris out. Besides Idris, I was also worried about my daughter, Annie. An hour felt like a year. I even began to regret my choices. If only I hadn't been so reluctant to let Idris go, if I had just given in when he first approached me. Then Fraser might never have found out, and perhaps we would have already left the city, living a peaceful life in some remote town. As I was lost in these thoughts, the door suddenly opened. Idris entered, backlit by the hallway light. No TV drama could capture the complex emotions I felt at that moment. Anxiety, fear, terror. I heard Fraser speak, as if greeting an old friend. It's been a long time, Idris. Or should I call you Mr. Q? Let her go, Idris demanded. Of course. Now that you're here, she's of no further use to me. Fraser tilted his head. Where's Gary Thorne? Release her first, then I'll tell you. Strangely, Fraser seemed to have no fear of Idris whatsoever. But then again, this was his territory. Given Idris's current status, he couldn't have called for much help. My bonds were loosened, and I ran behind Idris. He asked a few questions about my condition before finally relaxing a bit. Go home now, he told me. I refused to leave. What about you? Idris glanced at Fraser. We're old friends. I'll be fine. Fraser didn't deny it. I was still hesitating when Idris repeated, go. Sensing something was off, I turned and ran out. I kept running until I reached the ground floor, when suddenly a hand grabbed me. I was about to scream when a voice said, police. My eyes widened and I fell silent, my heart pounding. The man released me once I had calmed down and pulled out a police badge. Detective Inspector Barkley Fox, head of the drug squad. Barkley Fox. He looked somewhat familiar, as if I'd seen him somewhere before. Suddenly, a memory flashed through my mind. I remembered he had eaten barbecue with Idris years ago. You? Yes, Barkley Fox said in a low voice. Idris Ferrier is my colleague. The world was spinning. This whole situation was utterly absurd. I had been with my boyfriend for years, yet I had no idea he was a police officer all this time. Barkley didn't offer much explanation. Instead, he began asking me detailed questions about the layout of the rooms inside, the placement of objects, all the conversations that had taken place, and Fraser's current mental state. I finally realized that this situation was 100 times more terrifying than I had initially thought. The area outside was filled with plainclothes officers. Barkley asked one of the young men to take me home. Idris is still inside, I said. Barkley looked at me and replied, I'll bring him back to you. Then he added, in one piece. I ended up going home after all. Annie was still waiting for me there. The nanny said that the little one, who was usually so well behaved during the day, had been crying nonstop for some unknown reason. Nothing could console her. However, at that moment, I didn't have the heart to comfort Annie. All I could think about was Idris. I'm not stupid. Piecing together the different elements, I could roughly figure out the identity Idris had been hiding all along. Memories from the past kept flooding back. Idris had poor grades in school and was known as a troublemaker, often skipping classes and getting into fights. Later, he fell in love with me. I didn't like bad boys, so to make me happy, he started attending classes every day. He also stopped picking fights with others at the drop of a hat, just to please me. After I got into university, he enrolled in a vocational college in the same city. My family looked down on Idris, seeing him as nothing more than a small-time thug. They didn't want us to be together. Later, to meet my parents' expectations, Idris joined the military. 2 years later, when he was discharged, he didn't look for a job and seemed to be idling away his days. I thought he had gone astray and completely fallen from grace. We argued and fought. I begged him to give up that life, but he left me behind and went to Yorkshire. He said he was going to start a big business. Before he left, he gave me some money and broke up with me, cutting off all contact. But thinking about it now, how could Idris, who had been willing to study properly for my sake before, possibly disregard my well-being and head down the wrong path? I had considered countless reasons. But never once did I imagine that my boyfriend had actually been chosen to become an undercover agent. In fact, I had received a message from Idris before. It was a text from an unknown number. It only contained 4 words, "I love you, forever." That night, I waited until late but never received a call from the police. Idris didn't come home either. I could roughly guess the connection between Fraser and Idris, because the Mr. Q he mentioned was Idris's code name when he was in the drug den. I guessed that among the criminals who had been killed, there must have been someone Fraser knew. Perhaps someone very important to him. So when he saw that Idris was still alive, he harbored some hope. But he didn't realize that Idris might have never been a bad person from the very beginning. It wasn't until the next afternoon that my phone finally rang. It was Idris's voice on the other end. He said, "I didn't lie to you. This time, I've come back alive." Idris was injured during his last mission and took 8 months to recover fully. Following the doctor's advice and the organization's arrangements, he was supposed to go abroad to recuperate after faking his death. We couldn't be certain if there were any loose ends from the drug den we had busted. And it would have been a big problem if he was discovered. A young man chatted with me in the hospital room. But Idris refused. As soon as he could walk, he insisted on coming back. So we had no choice but to alter his identity information. Don't blame him, Esther. In our line of work, there's a lot we can't control. And no one is allowed to reveal even the slightest bit of confidential information until we can ensure absolute safety. Tears streamed down my face. I couldn't utter a word. The young man continued gossiping. You see, something did happen when he came back. Fraser Wickham was the boyfriend of that drug lord. We thought he was dead, but it turns out he's incredibly skilled. He came back from abroad with a new face and identity. You know, many drug dealers are like that. They live among us, appearing in various guises. We can't let our guard down for a moment. It was too much information to process at once. No wonder Fraser said he couldn't have children due to health reasons. And then said he wanted to use me as a cover for matchmaking. The drug lord was a man, which meant he wasn't interested in women at all. You talk too much, a hoarse voice came from the hospital bed. The young man's eyes lit up. Idris, you're awake. Idris fixed his gaze on me but addressed the young man. Based on what you've just said, I could already discipline you. The young man immediately shut up. I didn't say anything. Bye, Idris. Bye, Esther. He scurried away. As the young man left, the atmosphere in the hospital room instantly turned frosty. I remained silent while Idris looked at me expectantly. Finally, I spoke. I didn't know anything. Idris apologized. I'm sorry. If it weren't for this incident, were you planning never to tell me? It was for your own good. To hell with for my own good. The tears that had just stopped now started flowing again. Seeing me cry, Idris finally became anxious. He struggled to sit up but couldn't manage it. Darling, I'm in pain. Serve you right if you die from it. Let me hold you. No way. Despite my words, I still wrapped my arms around his waist, carefully avoiding the gunshot wound on his shoulder, and rested my face against his chest. His body was covered in scars, and the bullet hole near his heart silently spoke of the horrors he had endured. I traced his scars. Idris, it must have been tough. It's all in the past now. What if you had really died? The organization would have taken care of you on my behalf, ensuring you'd live comfortably for the rest of your life. My eyes welled up. Would you really have been willing to leave me? I couldn't bear to, that's why I came back, Idris grinned. As long as I have a breath left in me, I'd fight tooth and nail to keep you from running off with someone else. After Idris was discharged from the hospital, his work position was also reassigned. With the completion of his last mission and his identity exposed, he could no longer continue undercover operations. Considering his current physical condition, the organization transferred him back to the local police department's office, where he now handles document processing daily. On my end, with Fraser's downfall, the company appointed a new manager, and my resignation was forgotten. I was even promoted to manager and started handling business independently. As a result, Idris suddenly became the most idle person at home. I initially thought Idris would find it difficult to adjust. But surprisingly, he gradually found joy in being a stay-at-home dad. He works from 9 to 5 and spends the rest of his time taking care of Annie. Now, Annie is even closer to him than she is to me. At night, she even insists on sleeping with her dad, saying, "Mom, go away." Before, I was the one who took care of Annie all by myself, and she was closest to me. Now that she suddenly wants someone else, I felt a bit annoyed and unadapted. I actually grabbed my bedding and moved to the living room, leaving Idris to put Annie to sleep by himself. After I left, I realized I might have overreacted a bit. One is my own daughter, and the other is her father. What was I jealous about? Finding it amusing, I didn't go back in, leaving the father and daughter to their time together. About half an hour later, the bedroom door opened. Idris came out and asked, "Are you angry?" "No, I'm not." Idris kissed my earlobe. Liar. I squirmed away, ticklish. Then I heard Idris say, "Esther, no one is more important to me than you." I was speechless. Suddenly, Idris got down on one knee and took out a ring from his pocket. "I bought this 5 years ago, but I always felt I wasn't good enough for you, so I didn't dare give it to you." Idris smiled as he spoke. "People are strange, aren't they? When we were in school, I was crazy about you, following you around, wanting to marry you every day. But after graduation, when I finally won you over, I became hesitant." Idris paused before speaking again. "Esther, all that talk about noble sentiments in my life is nonsense. When I was dealing with those drug lords, when my life was hanging by a thread, I had only one thought. I, Idris Ferrier, wanted to be a man worthy of you, to marry you fair and square. Now I feel I'm worthy, but you've already given birth to Annie on your own. I don't know if I deserve." Idris paused again, and after a few seconds, he finally spoke. "Esther, will you marry me?" I was already in tears. I nodded vigorously. Idris, with trembling hands, slipped the ring onto my ring finger. For the first time, I saw tears glistening in his eyes. He suddenly ran to the balcony like a madman and shouted. I proposed, and she said yes. His shout startled Annie, who had been sleeping, and crying could be heard from inside. I saw the man's body visibly stiffen, and I couldn't help but laugh. "Go comfort your daughter." Idris's shoulders slumped as he muttered. "Maybe we shouldn't have had a child so early." I couldn't help but laugh again. Actually, I wanted to tell Idris that he had never been unworthy of me. He had lived under an assumed name, endured humiliation, carrying the nation's trust on his shoulders and the people's mission on his back. He is worthy of anyone. Idris is fortunate enough to have come back to me alive. I hope all narcotics officers can have this fortune. I hope they can all return safely.